Hello and welcome to Making Worlds, conversations about imagining otherwise. I'm Hannah McGregor, and if it sounds like my voice is a little weird right now, that's because it is. I seem to be allergic to oxygen. So everybody enjoy my fun new wheeze. It's sexy. So, on this show, I talk about fantasy, sci fi, speculative fiction, and other genres that let us imagine the world otherwise. And I do it with really cool, interesting guests. You may know me from Witch Please, a scholarly podcast about the wizarding world of Harry Potter that I co hosted with Marcel Cosman from 2015 to 2022. You might also know me from Material Girls, the podcast that Marcella and I now make together, where we use critical theory to understand the zeitgeist. I am an author, a podcaster, a scholar, and as mentioned previously, allergic to oxygen. So enjoy me coughing up a lung from time to time during this episode. Gabby might cut it out. Thanks, Gabby. For this episode, I have invited the all-knowledgeable Hilary Atleo to talk with us about the Imperial Ratch trilogy. Hilary Atleo is the owner of Iron Dog Books, a small bookstore located in Vancouver, British Columbia, mere blocks from my home. Hilary is Anishinaabe from Curve Lake First Nation on her mother's side and settler Canadian on her father's side. Her favorite books are melancholy, surreal, and fantastical, and we might just be talking about books with those particular set of traits today. So, we're going to be talking today about the Imperial Ratch trilogy, a trilogy that begins with the book Ancillary Justice. These books were written by Ann Leckie. The first one, Ancillary Justice, was published in 2012, and it became the first novel ever to win the Hugo Award, the Nebula Award, and the Arthur C. Clarke Award. Leckie started writing Ancillary Justice, which was her first novel, during NaNoWriMo, which is the National Novel Writing Month, and then finished it at the Clarion Writers Workshop, where she studied under Octavia Butler. The important thing for you to know about this trilogy is that it is set in a future space empire called the Ratch, hence Imperial Ratch trilogy. That's RADCH. It doesn't really matter. But what's interesting about the Ratch Empire is that they use AI-powered warships that have these armies of corpse soldiers. They call them ancillaries. It's only the people they conquer who call them corpse soldiers. And the ancillaries are bodies harvested during Imperial expansion and then turned into extensions of the ship's AI and used as a tool to continue spreading the dominance of the Ratch Empire. And our protagonist in this series is a ship AI is now locked in the single body of one of her previous ancillaries. So Hilary and I are going to talk about motherhood and gender roles and hopefully get a little bit into the liberatory potential of sci-fi. So let's go. Hi, Hilary.
Hi, Hannah.
How are you?
I'm very good.
Yeah?
Yeah, I love how bright it is, but I am really feeling this conversation about how Empire uses the actual bodies of its people that it's conquered.
Okay, well, why don't we talk about that? Why don't you tell me a little bit about why this is the trilogy you wanted to talk about? What do you love about this series of books?
This series came very highly recommended to me by a colleague of mine who had been selling it. I was working in a bookshop at the time, and he had been
Unlike now.
Yeah. Where I still work in a bookshop, I do tend to think of myself as working for the bookstore I own and not being the owner of the bookstore, which I think maybe says a lot about my relationship to ego. But so I was working in a bookshop I didn't own at the time, and one of my colleagues would sell this book to folks, and he kept saying it's it's like if the Borg were the heroes of the book.
Oh.
It's this hive mind that's the Borg. And so to me, as a Star Trek fan from childhood, I love the idea of delving into the psyche of this group, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who's famously the worst villain of Star Trek. And at the time, I had just had my first child, because this came out in 2012, right?
Yeah.
And my son was born in 2012, so this would have been the year afterwards when it was getting all this buzz, and I had an infant, and I was really consuming a lot of literature. And so I dove into it, and it really connected me to a lot of the, I guess, these particular themes that I like and I see repeated in my reading now. These ideas of imperialism and empire and how we resist and how to be a good person. And I love Breck, the main character.
Okay, so you know, you referenced this being a set of themes that you are often drawn to, and I know another one of your favorite books, A Memory Called Empire, has a, a dedication at the beginning that you paraphrase quite a lot. Do you remember what it is?
Yeah, the dedication of A Memory Called Empire, which is written by Arkady Martin, is dedicated to anyone who has fallen in love with a culture that is devouring their own. And I find that such a sad, bleak, and compelling statement as a very white passing Indigenous person, as someone who's married to an Indigenous person who's not white passing, but we have these two Indigenous kids who are being raised in the city with a lot less contact with their home communities than either my husband or I had. Which is, we try, but we don't always succeed at getting them out there so much. I really see this tension of being both attracted to the tools of empire or the strictures of empire and also rejecting them.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And I think that's one of the things that makes Breck, our protagonist, such a fascinating character is she was literally at one point a weapon of empire, right? She was a ship that was used in the violent military expansion of this empire. And the bodies, right? Her many ancillaries are the literal physical bodies of the people who were colonized. And at the heart of the whole sort of narrative of the trilogy is her coming to terms with the violence of empire and figuring out like what you do when you like realize that the thing that you were created to serve is in fact deeply harmful. And it's also about like how we can actually come to realize that.
That's the key point. Yeah, I think that's really like that's such a insightful observation about the books. Is the first book is written in these two parallel timelines, but it details it's you're not Breck isn't falling in love with a thing that's devouring her own culture. She, when she is the warship, is falling in love with something that is more important than the goals of empire. Like she's falling in love with this other way of being, and that's the thing that ultimately breaks her, so that she goes and becomes this individual. She is destroyed, like all of her other parts are destroyed, and she is left in one body with the thing she loves destroyed as well, to pursue this sort of straight up revenge quest, which also I think makes it like a very it's a very easy thing to get people hooked on, because you're like, yeah, and then she goes on a revenge quest. The first one is very much not a Western, but that very particular action oriented book.
It's really got that like um sort of lone figure seeking out revenge who then gets thrown together with an unlikely sidekick who both slows them down but also teaches them something important, and along the way, you know, their seeking of revenge gets complicated. Like in many ways it's a really familiar story structure, with the notable exception that our protagonist seeking revenge used to be a whole ass spaceship.
Yeah. Well, in that, one of the things that I think is so dynamic, and you can really see the lineage. Have talked before about how you can see that Ann Leckie was mentored by Octavia Butler, and you can
Mm-hmm.
also see the lineage from Ursula Le Guin directly to Ann Leckie of how you can experiment with gender.
I want to pick up on this gender point that you just made, because so again, we're talking about this protagonist with this fraught and complex relationship to empire. And again, not the same of like falling in love with a culture that's eating your own, but rather like coming to terms with the fact that the thing that you were deeply inside of is in fact profoundly violent, and kind of the problem of like only coming to terms with that when it ultimately destroys you, which is like, then what do you do when it's like, oh, I was fine with the violence until the violence came for me or for somebody I personally loved. But the trilogy is also not simplistic about the denigration of Ratch society. That it is interested in Ratch society, and it's interested in the many other societies that have been destroyed by Ratch society, or that the Ratch is attempting to destroy. But we're inside the mentality of somebody who has been inside this world for thousands of years, and we still get to see through Breck's perspective a lot of fascinating and kind of potentially liberatory dimensions of of the Ratch Empire. And one of the really notable ones is that the Ratch Empire doesn't have any sort of stable concepts of gender. Like, gender is not a significant way in which they think about people. I mean, it's got an incredibly hierarchical class structure, but gender does not matter to them, nor does sexuality. Because how would you have structures of sexuality when you don't have gender? You know what I mean? Like because gender isn't a thing, everybody fucks everybody. Um, and because they don't have gender in any, way that translates to how we think about it, Leckie signifies that for us by having Breck use she, her pronouns to talk about everybody who she encounters.
That is the Imperial Rat. They only have she, her pronouns. And
Yeah.
I've thought quite extensively about how you choose one set of pronouns, and Leckie chooses she, her, so that she can so that she, the author, can disrupt all of our assumptions about motivations. If we
Yeah.
use he, him as a standard, and you've mentioned this before, that there is a historical precedent for that being the kind of like neuter form of gender.
Yeah.
And by using she, her, we are I don't think of it as forced. I think of it as completely freed from any assumptions about any character's being or motivation or how they could possibly exist in the world, which is part of why Breck is compelling to me for two reasons. I find her compelling because she is unquestionably an action hero who is
Mm-hmm.
occupying this incredibly uh like in so many ways a feminized role in the books. And she is also someone, to touch on the things you were saying about the Empire, who is struggling with how to be good.
Yes.
All of the things that she was working through, or that all of the things that informed her of how to be good through her programming and through the society that she was, raised as an AI in, led her to one thing. And then the kind of critical event which breaks her and sends her into one body, she realizes, like, I don't know how to be good. And I
Yeah.
find it really compelling watching someone continually engage with people and go, I have to make a choice of how to be a good person, and sometimes maybe trying to make a bad choice. And you know that I don't like my heroes to be too complicated. I like it when they are genuinely trying to just be good.
It's a thing that I share with you, which is I think why so often we have the same favorite books, is that My favorite kinds of characters are people trying to do good in an unbearably complex world, because the world's complicated enough.
Yes.
Like, just people doing their best is still profoundly fascinating to me.
I agree. Trying to show up in a good way every day is my personal life project. And therefore when I see folks also struggle through the very hard things, I find it incredibly interesting. And I find the fact that Breck is freed from any gendered expectations to
Mm.
be very yeah, it is liberatory to me. I don't feel like it's an idea that is being like, now think about this. I feel like it's like a cracking open of this
Mm.
of possibility.
Oh, okay. Well, on that topic, why don't we get into the next segment, which is about the possibilities that get cracked open?
You know, we've talked about this a lot, Hannah, but having kids is a real uh
Mindfuck?
yeah, it's a real trip. And one of the things I found when I had my first child is that even when you're pregnant, even all these other things, you you're still yourself.
Mm.
You're still an individual. You've got all your things packed along. And as a mother specifically, or a gestational parent more broadly, but not as a non-gestational parent, there are some things about if you identify as a woman, or the joke at work is that I identify as like agender space mom. Like I
Hey,
just kind of
gender space mom.
because I think of mom as being like a its own gender, and which I now am part of. But when I first had my children, what I felt like was there was this mold, and whether you fit in the mold or not, you were going to be, squished into
Mm.
it until you just fit that mold. And as an example, if you think, what do I do for my mom on Mother's Day? You
Mm-hmm.
know, it
Yeah.
is the people around you are like, it's brunch and a candle and probably flowers. You find whoever is your mother figure and you do a limited number of things with that mother figure. So I was feeling these strictures very closely, and getting to dive into a world where you could be all of the things that I associate with motherhood and not have to want breakfast in bed,
Mm.
or not have to be trapped into all this particular sets of things, was I just found incredibly freeing. And it meant for me that I was like, there are other ways, there's just other ways to
Yeah.
exist.
Yeah. And that is one of I mean, about this book in particular, it the first time you mentioned it to me that you think of it as a book about motherhood, I was like, how? What? Nobody's a mother. What are you talking about? But you pointed out that particularly in the parts of the book when Breck is not Breck yet, when Breck is still the ship and is all of these ancillaries, Breck's job is care. Like, the ancillaries care for the humans on the ship. They are constantly monitoring their temperature, their mood, their physical comfort, making sure that they're eating, making sure that they're resting. And that becomes, once Breck is Breck inside this single body, it's still a thing Breck can't turn off. Like, that she has been literally programmed to be a caretaker who is hyper attentive to the physical and emotional well-being of those around her, and that structures the way that she moves in the world, even when she is this like rogue agent seeking revenge against a corrupt empire. She's still like, oh, this fucking guy's got frostbite, god damn it. Like, just she can't turn it off. But what she offers us is this other way of thinking of what it means to move through the world as somebody who is oriented towards that kind of care labor.
And who I think is actively involved in the tension of her revenge quest. The book opens on this frozen wasteland, and we meet Savardin, and there's so many things that folks have told me they find really confusing about the books, but my sort of deep secret is the thing I found most confusing about the books is why Savardin didn't die early on.
Savardin is a former officer from when Breck was a ship, who she finds in this frozen wasteland and rescues, and then keeps keeping alive, despite the fact that Savardin is like actively trying to end her life. Like Savardin is suicidal. Um, and it's the same. Like on the first read through, it's like, why the fuck are you spending so much time keeping this loser alive?
I mean, it's not just that she's suicidal, it's that she's actively detrimental to most of what Breck is trying to
Oh
do.
yeah.
And
She fucks
so
everything up. Yeah.
yes, and so you just when and the way she's written, which I also think you can see a little bit in the youth of Leckie's writing, Savardin, at least initially, isn't written in a way that made me want her to be a part of the series. Like I wasn't invested in her. You know, we're 2/3 the way through the book, and I keep thinking, when is she going to get left on a space station? Because just like sent away, I don't understand what the purpose of this character is. But if you stick with the whole trilogy, Savardin becomes a foil for this thing you are talking about, and kind of like a conduit of Breck back to herself as a person who cares.
Yeah. I want to draw some connections between this conversation about imagining other models of motherhood and the conversation about empire and bodies being used up by empire, because when we think about motherhood as an inherently oppressive structure, which I think sometimes in feminist conversations certainly we do, that's a version of motherhood that is attached particularly to like white supremacist capitalist patriarchal society, right? So there's also this imagining otherwise that happens in sci-fi and speculative fiction and fantasy that lets us see that ideas like motherhood can be divorced from, or like prized apart from, a lot of our like Western imperial assumptions and themselves imagined otherwise.
I think that's very true. And I think one of the great, so there's many great tensions about mothering, right? And I find it really funny that I wanted to have this conversation because famously this conversations about parenting and mothering aren't actually terribly interesting to me. But which again is part of what being squashed into the mold of motherhood. I was just like, I can't care about these things the way the world wants me to care about them, which is part of why I find the representations in Ancillary Justice so interesting, because Breck also doesn't care about performing this and performing anything in a way that the Ratch finds acceptable. She's abandoned that. And so one of the key tensions in being a mother in North America is this tension between whether it's the best thing you can do or the worst thing you can do.
It's both. It's the only acceptable thing to do as a woman and the most denigrated category in our society.
Yes, it is both of those things. And so it is a true damned if you do, damned if you don't moment. And by prying open the idea that it might be a really valuable job.
Yep.
But not like a sanctified job the way I think a lot of movements, like the trad wife movement and things like that, may encourage folks to think that it is this, sanctified is no other word for it, where there's this idea of holding my hands up, but this idea of motherhood, which is something that I don't fit, I don't like it, I don't want to do it. I really love my kids, I love hanging out with them, and I love being a good person, but not those things can all fit into many, many different forms of caretaking and community building that are not me like building a human inside my body and then giving birth to it,
Yeah, maybe instead it's about just putting your consciousness into a bunch of corpses.
Well, that's something that I find really well, now that you mention it. That is something that I find really fascinating because a through line when Breck, in the books, as you know, they she's on this revenge quest, but she still encounters both planets and communities that are part of the empire and not part of the empire.
Yeah.
And the communities that are not part of the empire vary wildly between uh, basically humans or aliens we like or aliens we don't like and don't understand. Like there's just a huge variety that they can meet, that she meets as she's traveling. And the humans from the non-imperial colonies in particular, they tend to be like, we can save you. We know you're in there. And Brett keeps saying, the only person in here is me.
Oh, that they want the body to still be the person it was before that body became an ancillary.
Yes, and that's something to link to Star Trek that Star Trek was quite obsessed with. It's this idea of breaking individuals out of the hive and saving them, a la
Yeah.
Seven of Nine. And Leckie, she's so much more harsh than that. She's Ann Leckie, the author, is not willing to allow that particular element of softness into that world. So this empire is a true destructive force, and also the force of civilization. It's very clear in the book that if you are a radchai, like a citizen, you are a person. And if you aren't a citizen of the empire, then you aren't a person.
The word for person, like the word for citizen and the word for human, are the same. So there's no actual way in for the Radchai to talk about the idea of a human who's not a citizen of the Ratch. And it's that way, that being inside, because we are inside Breck's perspective for the entire trilogy, that way of being inside somebody who is working through their own, like, not even indoctrination, like their literal creation by an empire. They're working through it from inside. And that's one of the things that makes it so fascinating, is not to have a character who is encountering some, very different, very violent society from the outside and encountering its strangeness, but to have somebody who is inside it. Certainly for me as a reader, that experience of unlearning the violence of the systems that you were created within is such a liberatory tool.
Yes, I completely agree. It's the thing that I find most powerful about the books, and that's why when I think of the how incredibly experimental. So the structure of the first book is there is a linear narrative, which timeline, where we are following Breck the soldier who meets Savardin, and that would be considered like present day. And then there are flashbacks to when Breck was the Justice of Torin with all of these different bodies.
Yeah.
And those sections are written simultaneously from the perspective of all the bodies, and it's such an incredibly experimental way to write a character. And that's the thing that most commonly folks go, it took me a really long time to adjust. The other thing most commonly the folks tell me is that they're trying to keep track of the genders of the characters in the book, and that I just found it so freeing to go, it doesn't matter, and just think of everybody as a body, and a body that like a totally neutral body to which attributes were then added. So you meet a character and they have a name, and then they get described with a height or a particular aesthetic or anything, and not to carry along all the baggage that being assigned a particular role would have with it. Already I see myself in other literature saying, okay, well, you meet a feisty young woman, and there's like there's a whole bunch of things that go along with it. Like she probably has a tragic backstory.
Well, what's the point otherwise?
Yes. And none of that's present in Leckie's books because Leckie's not interested in that.
Yeah.
You know, she's interested in building a bunch of characters and letting them figure out how to be in the world.
All right. It is time for the traditional Making Worlds Mad Lib. Hilary, are you ready?
Okay.
Let's start with a plural noun.
Okay. Waves.
And another plural noun.
Rocks.
A color.
Gray.
An adjective.
Slimy.
And another plural noun.
Crabs.
Really, really good. An adjective.
Cold.
A noun.
Vapor.
Another noun.
Anchor.
A adjective.
Uncomfortable.
And one final plural noun.
Well, I was going to say sinister. Now I want to go back and make uncomfortable sinister.
Okay. We can make uncomfortable sinister.
Okay, make uncomfortable sinister.
Uncomfortable in a specific way, in a sinister way.
Yeah. Uncomfortably sinister. With throw a little adverb action in there.
One final plural noun.
Plural noun. Storms.
All right. We're ready for the opening of your new sci-fi novel.
Okay.
When you awoke, you were on a planet covered in waves and rocks.
Oh, yeah.
Above you, the sky was gray and full of slimy crabs.
Horrifying.
The air smelled cold, like vapor and anchors. You looked around for people, but all you saw were uncomfortably sinister storms. Suddenly, you realized those storms were alive. Maybe that's where all the slimy crabs are coming from.
Yeah, I feel slimy crabs was maybe not quite the right spot as far as this.
I think it's perfect. I think the sky should be full of slimy crabs because that's the kind of magic that this genre can imagine. All right, well, that's the end. Bye, Hilary. Thanks for coming.
Thanks so much for talking to me about my favorite book.
Oh, I love it. Making Worlds is a Witch Please production, and it is funded entirely through you, our beloved Patreon supporters. So chances are, if you are watching / listening to this right now, it means that you support Witch Please Productions on our Patreon, for which I say thank you so much. You are literally the only reason any of this can happen. And I love talking to people about sci-fi and fantasy, so you're making my dream come true. You, specifically. You. Thank you. If you want more Witch Please Productions content, you can find us on social media. We are on Instagram and X at A Witch Please, and we have a fantastic Substack. You can find the link to our Substack and subscribe to it on our excellent website, awitchplease.ca, where you can also find our other shows and merch. Who knows? Maybe we'll make some Making World merch. Maybe we'll make a The Sky is Full of Slimy Crabs t-shirt. Thank you to everyone on our team who makes Making Worlds possible. Our producer, Zoe Mix. Our associate producer and editor, Gabby Iori. Our executive producer, Hannah Rehack, aka Coach. And, of course, the incomparable, magical Marcel Cosman, co-founder of Witch Please Productions. We'll be back next month to talk about a whole new piece of media that asks us to imagine otherwise. Until then, subscribe to our YouTube channel for bonus content and tell your friends how much you love this show and how my voice sounds like a haunted old woman. Bye!